So The Defining Decade by Meg Jay is a book that is written for people who aren't going to read it and is read by people who probably don't need it. I'll explain. So if you haven't heard of this book before, it's a psychology/self-help book, and that's literally what it's labeled as on the back. It's targeted towards people in their 20s who aren't doing much with their life, and it's meant to kind of kick things into gear for them and to make them realize that, if they want a career or good friends or a good family or, kids or marriage or whatever, they have to work for it and they have to actually take the steps towards obtaining it. The idea is that people in their 20s are constantly told that they can play around, basically they have time, they're young, might as well enjoy it while you can. Basically the idea behind this book is that Meg Jay, who's a therapist, has seen this many times where people in their 20s follow that advice, they play around essentially, and they are surprised when they don't actually go anywhere in life. Now, I do think that there are some assumptions being made with the entire thesis of the book. We'll get to that in a second, but I wanted to explain what I first said. This book is written for people who aren't going to read it. I think that if someone has their life out of order and they are in need of a book telling them to get it in order, I think they probably aren't going to be reading these kinds of books anyways. And when I said that this book is read by people who probably don't need it, the opposite is true. I think that if you are reading books like this, then you probably don't have to worry that much about where you're going. I think you probably are thinking about the future. So I actually found this book because of Meg Jay's TED Talk. She essentially sums up the book in like 10 minutes. It's a good watch. I would recommend it if you're interested. And then in addition to that, my friend Molly, who I one time threatened to kill in front of like 10 people, she recommended the book to me also, so I had to read it. So let's start with the good and then we'll go to the bad. So first off, the good. The book's actually pretty enjoyable. It's short, it's like 200 pages. I'm not really a fan of self-help, to be honest, because I don't think it ever amounts to much. I think that most of self-help is people telling you things that you already know. It's like, you should wake up earlier, or, if you want to achieve goals, then you should set habits that help you achieve those goals. And it's like, yeah, I know this, like, it's obvious. And I think that's how it is with this book as well. I don't think that there are too many things that Meg Jay writes about that are going to be mind-blowing or shocking or whatever. There are some statistics you might find interesting. The book is split up into 3 sections: work, love, and then the mind and body. So in the work section, Meg Jay writes about how if you want a career, then you should do what's necessary to achieve that career. So if you need to go to law school, you should go to law school. Or in the love section, if you want to get married, then you should probably start dating people who are serious candidates for marriage. Who would have thought? And I think a lot of this book is geared towards people who are scared of commitment. They're scared of growing up, so to speak. And so I think the book just serves as a reminder that if you want something, you kind of have to chase after it. And I think that's probably the best thing about the book, is that the way Meg Jay writes is actually very empowering. She's someone who encourages you to take charge and to go after and chase the future you want. And I think that's one of my favorite things about the book. That's one of the best things I can say about the book, actually, is she's not trying to sell you on some kind of fantasy happiness. Because pretty early on, she does dispel some myths, such as the idea that you can do literally anything in life. And it's like, no, you can't. But still, maybe you can make something good of your life. And I really like the tone of the book. I don't feel like she ever felt judgy. I don't feel like she ever looked down upon the people who she talks about who maybe don't have their life in order quite the way that they would like. So a lot of the advice in this book is pretty common sense. I feel like it's pretty common advice. Maybe it's not common sense, but it's definitely something that you would hear from your parents or your grandparents or, just a friend or a boss or something. Just, hey, when are you gonna do this? You said you were wanting to go back to school. When are you gonna do it? Just the regular questions that older people annoy you with. Honestly, my big takeaway from this book is just the idea that the future will happen, which is crazy, right? It's crazy to think about the fact that one day I will be 34. I'm not 34 now, but one day. It's kind of scary. And I'll be 45 and I'll be 61 and I'll be 78 if I live that long. Nothing's guaranteed, so it's kind of dark to think about. So I'm making fun of this book a little bit, but honestly, I did enjoy it. I thought it was a nice read. Honestly, my biggest problem with self-help is just the fact that engaging with self-help material makes you feel like you're doing something when you're not actually. So it's like if you have a goal of, going for a jog, that's doing something. But if you read about systems to put in place to help you go on that jog and you don't actually put those systems in place, you will still feel good about it as if you actually did something when you didn't. And so I think that's one of the pitfalls of self-help in general. But with this book, I feel like there are actually things to learn. I feel like there are actually a couple lessons that are interesting. One criticism I do see lobbed at this book that I think is very fair, actually, is that it doesn't really take into account the external conditions that need to be met in order for you to find a good job or find a good partner, right? Because it's like these things aren't completely on you. Like if you can't find a good partner, then maybe there just isn't anyone out there right now. If you haven't found a good job, for instance, it might not all fall on you. I think that there is a degree of chance involved. There is a degree of luck involved. I've heard stories of people just stumbling into jobs and then they stay there for 30 years and it all works out. And with regards to like marriage, for instance, Meg Jay talks about how the average marriage age is going up, which that's a fact. That is undeniable. And she writes about how the problem with that is that, you know, if you want kids, you can't have kids whenever you're super old. So you can't exactly wait on that. But the thing is that if you are dating and if you are looking and you're taking care of yourself and whatever, then you might not find someone to marry, right? I don't think the book ever explicitly states you must have a career, you must be married, you must have kids. This is the path to happiness. In fact, I think that it states the opposite a couple times, which is that not everyone wants this. Not everyone does want kids. Not everyone does want a career. And to them, I would say, I guess this book isn't for you, honestly. And I don't say that mean. I'm not trying to be rude, but rather I think that this is targeted at people who do want that, right? Which is most people. Like, I think most people want, you know, a family. They want a loving relationship. You know, they want a good career that makes them feel fulfilled and valuable and happy. And again, I think that especially in this day and age, like we lived in such a weird, bizarre society that is completely unlike anything else that's ever existed. And so I think it is safe to say that, you know, in this post-COVID world, things are different. Things aren't the way they used to be. But at the same time, I do think that, you know, even though we are affected by forces outside of ourselves, I think we still have autonomy, right? I think that we still have control over a lot of things, actually. And so I would like to believe that if you work and try hard enough, then eventually you will find success. How long will it take? I don't know. But in my mind, I don't really think there's anything better to do than to just keep on trying, right? If you haven't found success, then what else are you going to do, honestly, besides try? Because it's like if you sit around doing nothing because you're sad that you're not successful, then that's a guaranteed failure, you know, as opposed to the hope of trying. Then one assumption that's built into the basis of the book is just the idea that there are tons and tons of people who are just slacking off, doing absolutely nothing with their lives. And there are people like that. There are absolutely people like that. And in fact, I think that we all kind of, at one point or another, fall into that category, whether or not we realize it. I think that we all kind of have times when we get discouraged or maybe are just lazy. And so we're not living up to expectations. But honestly, a lot of the people I know are trying. A lot of people I know are putting in effort and they are, you know, finding success, right, in different ways. I think there are a lot of people in their 20s who take full advantage of their youth and who do something, right? There are people who, you know, they get married young or they graduate college young or, you know, whatever. They do any number of things that, you know, you're expected to do while young. But of course, that's not always a good thing. And I think the book does touch on this idea a little bit, that people do different things at different ages. So for instance, not everyone is going to graduate from college at the age of 19. That's just not happening. But at the same time, Meg Jay does make a good argument for why you should get your butt into gear and why you should be working hard towards things, because you're not going to be young forever. And that's one thing that the book touches on as well, is the idea of present bias, which is just the idea that things that happen sooner feel more real to you than things that are far off. And honestly, I think that makes perfect sense, because of course, next Tuesday feels more real to me than 50 years down the road. It's like, I can't even envision what that would look like 50 years down the road. You know, maybe we'll have robots and, you know, AI and whatever else, or maybe a nuke will have gone off. Either one's a possibility. So in closing, I like this book. I think there are problems with it, but I found it to be a good enough read to recommend. Thank you for the recommendation, Molly. Thank you for watching this book review. Apparently now I'm a booktuber, so here we are. So. Doop.